So a little bit of backstory, right? In 2016, I was opportune to shoot a wedding alongside my very good brother and senior colleague, Larry Shaw, in New York City. And remembering this day like yesterday, it was actually the only time that I've ever been to a real castle. This particular castle is called Oika Castle, and this location, I must tell you, is fantastic. It's beautiful. It's nothing like I've seen before. The topography, the landscape, the scenery, the building, the architecture, it was just overall beautiful, and I did enjoy shooting that wedding. And I remember vividly, it was my first time of seeing and even working with the Canon C70 Mark II. At the time I owned a 5D Mark III, and this camera served a turn. It was the best camera I'd ever used, and I think I was able to, find a way to get the most amazing looking footages out of this camera. So seeing the Canon C100 Mark II, it looked totally off. The ergonomics was just weird. It wasn't something I was used to. It looked like your fancy camcorder that Uncle Bob will bring to a wedding. But I was just curious to see what the camera had to offer. And immediately after the wedding, right, I flipped through the footages and I was wowed. I was stunned. It was just crisp. The footages out of this camera was clean. It was sharp. It was something that I've been wanting in my 5D Mark III that I didn't get. And interestingly for me, that was the start of my amazing journey to shooting Canon cinema cameras. Check it out. Welcome to yet another exciting video. If you're new here, my name is Timmy Davies. I'm a cinematographer and a docu-filmmaker based in Lagos, Nigeria. Please consider subscribing and liking this content. I sincerely appreciate it. Over the years, I've been able to shoot tons of cameras, ranging from your DSLR to your hybrid mirrorless and of course your proper professional cinema cameras. My journey to shooting cinema cameras has been interesting. I started with the Canon C100 Mark II, and then I moved to the C300 Mark I and the Mark IIs, even the C500 and the likes. But in this particular video, I'll be talking about the latest addition to the Canon cinema line, which is the ultimate Canon C70. This video is in no way sponsored. However, I have been given this camera by Canon Central North Africa to take for a spin, and I must say thank you guys for considering me to be one of the people in Africa to test this camera. In this particular video, I'll be talking about things that I like about the camera and things I don't necessarily like. This is in no way a comprehensive technical review. I'm sure there are tons of videos on the internet and on YouTube that address this issue already. In no particular order, let's get into the things that I like about the Canon C70. The first on my list would be the ergonomics and the form factor. This camera, like every other Canon camera, is solidly built. Coming from a 1DX Mark II owner and shooter, this camera feels solid. It grips perfectly well in your hand. It feels tight and light. It is not as heavy as your bulkier cinema camera, and at the same time not as light as your mirrorless or DSLR. This camera is like a perfect bridge between your mirrorless DSLR and the higher end cinema cameras. Apparently, this camera is weather sealed. I must tell you, this camera is built like a tank. This camera, like most other cinema cameras, is Super 35mm. And the exciting thing about this particular camera is it shares with the Canon C300 Mark III an amazing newly built sensor from Canon, which is the DGO sensor, which of course means dual gain output. Let me explain this in the best way I can. So this is the camera assigning two circuitries, one taking care of the highlights and the other one taking care of the shadow, which essentially means you're getting the best of both worlds to produce a fantastic looking picture, right? So see this as a Ronaldo and Messi playing on the same team. Imagine that, right? This camera is advertised as 16.5 stops of dynamic range, which essentially puts it half a stop over the Canon C300 Mark III. I cannot exactly overemphasize the need of ND filters as a video shooter or even a documentary filmmaker. This particular camera allows you to go from 2 stops to extensive 10 stops of ND filter inbuilt. If you are the type that likes to shoot wide open and you're in a bright sunny light, no problem. This camera allows you to go from 2 stops to 10 stops inbuilt. All you have to worry about is nailing your perfect exposure and then worry less about stacking filters in front of your glass. This camera is amazing. One less worry works for me every time. Something I also want to mention about this camera is the menu system. We all know Canon for their intuitive menu, and this camera is no exception when it comes to the menu layout and system. This camera allows you to easily access everything you need, your recording option, your formatting the cards, your picture profile and whatnot. This camera is just a breeze through. A 2-year-old can easily operate this thing. Well, maybe not a 2-year-old, but I mean, I'm just saying that this camera is very simple to operate. You get the gist, right? Okay, thank you. And even beyond that, you have most of your, functioning tools or functioning options right on the body of the camera, from the record button to the waveform to the white balance to the peaking to the zebra. You have everything right there accessible to you, and this is just well made, honestly. One exciting thing about this particular camera is the recording format and the codecs. This camera allows you to record XFAVC and HEVC, which ultimately are good things to work with. And your MP4, your 4K 422 10 bits, it allows you to record 4K 120, 4K 60p, and then your DGO sensor is active until I think 60p. But when you go above 60 frames per second, you lose your DGO, right? Unlike the C300 Mark II, this camera allows you to shoot 4K 120 still at Super 35, right? It doesn't punch in. The only time it punches in is when you go to your 2K Super 16 mode to access the 180 frames per second. But for me, the fact that I'm a docu shooter and I have access to 4K 120, I think I'm fine. And the exciting thing also is that the 4K 120 also allows you access autofocus, which is amazing. I mean, I don't find myself using autofocus a lot of the time, but I think it's a plus that this particular function is available to us, right? And the fact that this camera allows you to record separately your audio file in a different card, yeah, that's also exciting. Another thing I would like to talk about this camera is the battery life. The battery life is amazing. On the BPA30, I think I've been able to successfully get roughly around 3-4 hours thereabouts. It depends also on what you're doing with the camera, but I mean, it's a longer battery lifespan. For me, if you have the BPA60s, I think you're good. If you have the BPA60 and the BPA30, or even 2 or 3 of BPA30s, I think you should be fine on your entire production. So this camera, with what it packs for me, I think this battery life is amazingly good compared to other cinema cameras that Canon cinema cameras I've worked with. So yes, that's also a plus for me. There's a lot of misconception and complaints about the autofocus of this particular camera. I mean, we all know Canon systems to be, the king of autofocus, right? But in this particular camera, there's been a lot of complaints. For me personally, I've not been able to, test it fully, but so far I don't have any problems with the autofocus, but I'll put it to proper test in the next video and see how it pulls up with other Canon systems. But for me, I've taken it on plenty of productions and so far I don't have problems with the autofocus. However, I think it's just, getting used to the settings and whatnot that will make you comfortable around this particular camera. This particular camera can serve as B cam for the C300 Mark III and then the C500 Mark II. I mean, they both shoot 4K, and this camera shoots up to 10-bit 422, which is amazing. Interestingly, it has a C-Log 2, the C-Log 3, the HLG, and other picture profile in it. So I feel like this camera can, pair with the higher end cinema cameras. Another thing I like about this camera is like the professional tools that you have access to, talking about your waveform monitor, your peaking, your zebra, your white balance button on it, and even the XLR, the mini XLR. The preamps in this particular camera is amazing. You don't have to worry about audio, and then you have, your XLR, your mini XLR input. You have all your audio dial at the back of the camera, which is exciting. This camera has 2 SD card slots, and then you can record on them simultaneously. You can record proxy on the second one while you record the main recording format or the recording option to the first one. And something I also like about this camera is the time code. I cannot exactly overemphasize the use of time code, right? As somebody who shoots multicam, time code is necessary for me, and thankfully this camera has it. Oh, by the way, did I mention that this camera is licensed on Netflix as one of the approved cameras? Yes, that's true. For a $5,500 camera, this is amazing news. And I see me getting even 1 or 2 or maybe 3, as the case is. I'm a wedding shooter, by the way. So yeah, this is exciting. This is all I need in my hand. I mean, it feels like a baby, really. This camera is just smooth, sexy, well built, you know. Feels like I'm holding baby. Canon also understanding the need to record IGTV and vertical videos. They incorporated a mounting option just right here. You can mount it on your tripod, and also just view your camera this way. So this is well made and this is beautiful. This is an addition that I see myself using a lot of the time, because who knows, maybe the vertical video is the next thing. Don't get stuck beneath change, right?
Maybe I would just ride with the wave of change than getting stuck beneath it.
The only thing I don't necessarily like about this camera is the fact that it doesn't have SDI output, which is not exactly a deal breaker for me. I mean, I still have my HDMI to, use as external monitors or whatever, but I think I'm fine with the way the camera is built. I mean, understanding the form factor, the size, and even judging by the price of this camera, you can't have it all, right? So I think you have to sacrifice some things for the other. So for me, this particular camera is a yes for me. Over 10, I think I'll rate it a 9.5. I'd say this monitor is fairly better, is brighter, and then I just love the layout. And it might not necessarily be something interesting, but it's just, for me, it's interesting to see. And if I'm not fine with this, I can also put my small HD or the Atomos Ninja 5 and run it through HDMI, which is something exciting. But I think this camera is just beautiful. I think I've said beautiful a lot of time, and amazing. But yeah, that's how the camera is making me feel, I know the question popping in your mind right now is, who is this particular camera for? I say this camera is made for everyone, especially if you're trying to migrate from the DSLR and mirrorless world to a Canon, cinema camera ecosystem. This camera ultimately is for you. And then if you're a docu shooter, a wedding filmmaker, or even music videos, I think this camera is capable and can deliver up to par. And yes, it's a wrap on this particular video. If you like this video, please give it a like, share and comment, and also consider subscribing. I'll be in the comment section below if you have questions to ask pertaining this camera. And until next time, do have a great one. Bye.